Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we are talking to somebody who's a master of a branch of writing that we haven't spoken about a huge amount before. I am very, very excited to welcome Virus, the poet, to the show. How are you doing, Virus?
I'm great. How are you guys doing?
I am doing fantastically today, and we ought to check in with the man himself. We wouldn't be here without Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you, Roland, and thank you for coming on the show. I don't know, should I call you Virus? It seems
Yeah, you
it seems so weird calling you Virus. But your real name, I think, Viral Gor.
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
And but you go by Virus the Poet. So
Yeah, it's a stage name.
yeah. So and so, where do you perform? You perform this? Like, I assume you have written some poetry books as well, right? But you also perform it live.
Yeah, I perform it live. I'm based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So definitely all around Canada. I've also performed in the States and as well as Europe. So quite a few places, and it's great.
Your book is Poetry is Motion.
The book
mind,
is
body, and soul.
Exactly.
International #1 bestseller.
Yes. No, I'm very happy, very, very proud of it. It's my life's work thus far. Poetry is Motion, Mind, Body, and Soul. Go get it right now. It is a collection, an anthology of poems in this book, and I made sure not to write a book of poems with 100+ poems, because as you guys know, when you write something, it takes us time to write it. So I can't imagine a reader to be able to digest it after a 5-minute quick read and then move on, right? Especially when it comes to poetry, it can be quite heavy. So as long as it takes us to write it, we hope that the readers, appreciate that and take it in just as much as we've written it.
Absolutely, I love poetry. The first thing I ever got published was a poem, and it's funny. I don't think I've read many. I don't necessarily read poems very often, but sometimes you're just in the mood for it. And you just read it and it means something to you and it's like significant. And sometimes you want to write something and it's like you might not think of yourself as a poet, but then you write something and you're like, I needed to write that. It's cathartic.
Yeah. Or you come across something on your timeline like a poem and you read it and you're like, wow, I didn't know I needed that today. And it gave me some sort of clarity or some hope, or made me think clearer and gave you a vision. So you never know when you're gonna need it.
And you perform as well. You do spoken word. I love that. I mean, there's one guy, Prince EO. I can't remember.
Yeah, Prince EO. Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, I watch him, and you just get transfixed by it. So I'm going to watch some videos of you doing, because it is spoken word poetry. Is really
it is spoken word. Cool. Yeah, he's taken a whole different direction, which is like more production around his pieces, which is awesome from a visual standpoint for sure. But yeah, people like that just have this innate ability to connect with an audience through their words, much like you guys do, just having a conversation and captivating people and their mindsets and where they're trying to go, who they're trying to be. And so I try to do the same with Poetry is Motion.
Yeah. So where do you perform this? Like, I'm from Toronto. I mean, I live north of Toronto now, but
nice.
But I'm always up there. And so do you perform this at like clubs or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I've performed quite a few different places. So the Art Bar is where I got started. The best place for me is because it's where the first place I ever did an open mic. And I didn't know I had to perform my art, but to get it out there to the world, you kind of have to perform it. And so the Art Bar was my home away from home. And that was the first place where I got the stage presence. I learned it. I learned how to connect with people, how to have those conversations, how to just illustrate what I'm trying to say and preach with the poems. And then I performed at the Drake Hotel and a few other places throughout the city. Up from the Roots is another one that was really good by Dwayne Morgan, and just kind of sprinkled around the city and wherever I could, and then going overseas or to other cities and just performing at their speakeasy cafes and such.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know a lot of our listeners are fiction writers, so and often fiction writers, there's the idea that they are sort of introverts, which for the most part they are.
But, for sure.
So I think the idea of getting up and performing your your poetry live, reading live? I mean, authors sometimes do go to bookstores or signs and they do reading of the work, but no, it's not for everyone. So that's an interesting thing that you said. It's almost like you have to do that as part of being a poet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you 100%. You know, most artists, I think, that have some sort of art aspect to them are introverts, and just because they like to keep it to themselves. You know, when you're a little kid and you're drawing something that's vulnerable to you, and you're just kind of doing it on your own, and you're not really doing it to present to the world. So it takes a lot of confidence over time to build that ability to just be like, yeah, I'm going to share it with the world. Or I have as much confidence in my pieces or my art to, you know, show it and be well received, because you, of course, especially in this age of social media, you always worry about the scrutinization and the negative comments and stuff, right? So I agree with you. But for the stage, I actually don't like the stage. I have a lot of stage fright. To your point, I don't like, I like writing. I'm more of the, you know, behind the scenes. I want to write, I can draft it, I can make compelling, but to present it took me a while before I even got on the stage. And I only got on the stage because my friend, who's also the owner of Lord of Ties, he actually saw. You guys remember the old BlackBerry with the side scroll?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's the
You're
phone
not speaking to me of the old ways, Gandalf. I was there.
There you go. There you go. So there's not much you could do on that phone except play, I think, Brick Breaker and the memo pad. And so that's where I started writing, and I just wrote a whole, you know, bunch of poems. And then he saw it one day, he said, you know, these are really good, and, you know, people can relate to it. And so I didn't really believe him at first. So it took some time. And then he finally said, you know, you should go on a stage and really share it. And so that took some time to, you know, get my mind right for it. And I finally did it. And I remember the first time I ever went on stage, I was shaking. Like, I was literally visibly shaking because, you know, one, poetry already is a personal thing, right? Anything you write, it's personal. It's almost like a journal or self-therapy. You're not really trying to share it. And then when you do, you don't know how it's going to come across, and who's going to take it in what direction. And so, you know, I was literally shaking. And I remember that time, and I was so nervous. And then I finally did it. I got off stage, and and after that, I was like, okay, I need to get better at this. And just because, like you said, Craig, you know, it's one of those things where poetry, I think you have to stand up in front of an audience at some point just to convey what you're trying to do. Just to get, you know, more eyes on it, more listeners, more ears, and I'm trying to take it to a different place.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I'm the same way. If I have to get up in front of a crowd, I visibly shake, and you know, it's different doing a podcast sitting here with people and just chatting on the internet, but but actually going out, yeah, it's not my thing. But no, I mean, that's great. Like, especially because, you know, you didn't get into it sort of with the idea of performing, but you were still able to push yourself and do that because it was required. So I mean, I think that's more of a testament to how important it is to you to be a poet and to live that lifestyle of performing it and getting your message out there. So that's great.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of get out of your comfort zone, because we can get, you know, very comfortable in our comfort zone, and we never want to step out because we don't know. It's the fear of the unknown, right? And for me, that was exactly it. It was the fear of, I don't know if it was going to be well received. I didn't know how I was going to perform, if I was going to stumble, and I did. All the things I thought was going to happen happened. You know, so thankfully, I had the mindset of capturing on video, and I would do like a lot of even athletes do, which is watch the game tape back and see what you did wrong, what you can improve on, if you can enunciate clearly, if I'm moving too much, if I'm fidgeting, you know, all these little things, and you pick up on it because you're your own worst critic, right? So you know what you're doing right. The audience probably doesn't know, you know, a thing when you're doing wrong, but you'll know. So that's why I always try to do it. Even today, if I perform, I try to get it on video, just so I can watch back, see what I can do, even some podcasts.
So where do you like get your inspiration from? Like, what kind of poetry are you writing primarily these days, and where do you pull that from?
Yeah, so I pull the poetry, I guess the ideas, from anywhere really, when it comes to your interaction with other people, with situations, maybe family, friends. Travel is a big part of my life, so I'd often write about travel and what that does to me, and the correlation between, going to a new place and learning something new, be exposed to new cultures, ethnicities, foods, just landscapes. So really that's where I get a lot of my ideas from. But other times, right now, COVID's done now, right? It's officially, I think it's over officially.
I hope so. Maybe there's going to be
I hope
COVID
so.
2.0.
Yeah.
The electric boogaloo.
I hope not, because I think COVID, they always say it's the big reset, but I think for a lot of people, it was like a social reset. So now, you go back to the world, and now you have to learn to interact with people again, and you have to learn how to take social cues and how to have a normal conversation, and that's not so easy for everyone. And so I think right now I'm just kind of writing pieces around bringing society back to kind of the pre-COVID norm, and see where that comes, and even in relationships, how that's altered even in the dating world and relationships, and how that's really made a difference in with a lot of people that I know. So that's part of my poem pieces are centered around today. But yeah, ideas kind of come from anywhere. If we have a conversation during this podcast and something sparks my interest, I'll think about it later, make a voice note, and just kind of go back and figure it out.
So one of the things that interests me about poetry, because I am not a poet, but in my life as a kid or whatever, various times in my life, I've had to write a poem or two. And it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like the art of, I guess, like songwriting, right? Where I always kind of think, with songwriting, I think, okay, how do they do it? Do they write the words first and then the music? Do they do the music first? So with poetry, I kind of have that same sort of thought. Is, when I would write a poem,
Right.
you have some, basic idea of what you want to write about, because these were not, these are, limericks or whatever.
Sure.
But like, I would have to think about, I would sort of maybe come up with a line and then just basically try to rhyme it. I had a lot of thought about that. Now, I don't even know if your poetry rhymes, but because I know that there's lots of poetry that doesn't. I personally, don't really understand what makes, maybe you could explain this, like what makes something a poem when it doesn't rhyme, because, growing up, I was kind of like, hey, poems rhyme, right?
Right.
But what's the process of that? Do you, assuming that you didn't write rhyming poetry, but do you think of like, okay, you start writing the lines and you try to find something that rhymes that makes sense with that, and then go from there? Or what's that creative process for people that haven't written a lot of poetry?
That's a good question. I think from the basis, it actually, you know what? So from the beginning, when I started, it was about rhyming. Right. I have a lot of hip hop influence. So the first kind of idea was, you say one line and you try to rhyme the next line, at least the first word with the last word, or first and last, and vice versa. So that's how it started. But as I've gotten older and have been doing, writing poetry for a lot longer, I realized you don't have to rhyme. Sometimes what it comes down to is, what is the message you're trying to convey? What are you trying to get across? And sometimes it's abstract, and abstract pieces don't have to rhyme. I remember I went to the art bar one time, and there was a guy up there, and he had his own poem, and it was just kind of exclamation points after each line, and that was his poem, and it didn't rhyme at all, not one bit. And but he conveyed the type of message he wanted to portray, right? And so for him, that was his piece. So I think poetry is for each individual person. For me, my style is spoken word, more rhythmic. I actually didn't start putting music or any melodies to my pieces until maybe a couple years ago, and since then it's added a better dramatic effect, for lack of a better word, and I've enjoyed it. But for me, I write first, so I'll have an idea. I'll take hidden gems, for example, and I'll start with that, and I'll have an idea in my mind of what I'm trying to portray with this poem. Is it hidden gem? Don't just listen to the lines, read between them, which is the tagline of Viral Poetry is Motion, Mind, Body, and Soul. What are you trying to put in between that, right? Are you saying the hidden gem is the fiction that I'm writing, it's the story that I've just illustrated, it's the characters development? So it really depends on what you're trying to share and share with the world, really, and convey.
So the idea is like the idea of being rhythmic as opposed to rhyming. So can you sort of give me an example, like what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I don't want to. For me, not every line has to rhyme with the one before or the one after, but there's a flow to it. So if you ever listen to, I don't know, any musical artist, there's a flow to it. If you listen to a Beyonce album or even Taylor Swift, there's a flow and how they carry or ride the beat. Like Eminem does a great, Jay-Z, Drake. They kind of ride the beat. I don't necessarily ride a beat pause, but I do try to just make sure when you're reading it, it's a flow. Like it's clear that in the message there's a flow to it. And you'll see an example of that when poetry is motion, mind, body, soul. If you read the book or listen to even my album on Spotify or go on YouTube, you'll see there's a clear flow of just from the start to the finish that it continuously goes.
Right. Yeah, I think that is what I've seen some spoken word stuff too, and I do understand what you mean by rhythm, but I was hoping that to try to get an idea to put it in words of what it is. Like I can picture what it is and I know what it is, but it's hard to sort of describe like what it is. That
well,
rhythm.
I can read one of the poems. I can read one of the poems in the book, and I will kind of show you that.
That'd be great, yeah. Because you're right. I think the idea of thinking about it in terms of like a song, which obviously they don't rhyme, but they are rhythmic. So that and without the beat behind them, you can still have that rhythm. So I think that's good to see.
Exactly. So give me a second here. Let me find a good one that has that kind of flow that we're talking about. Yeah, okay, I got one. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Don't ever let anyone knock your hustle. They don't know what you've been through. They don't see your muscles. Flexed and pulled in all directions. Stability is the intention, but all they see is the final product without hesitation. You are your own inspiration, taken in strides to no avail. Sail to your destination and plant your flag. You have captured what you intended. Forget the jet lag. Virus the poet. So that
I like it. It's got the kind of the beat to it, the rhythm, like the
exactly. It's the rhythm, but there's a flow to it, right? From the beginning to the end, it just kind of flows. And that was the goal, is to make sure it flows smooth and seamlessly, so that when you're reading it, it captivates you and makes you want to complete the poem, right?
Right. And I guess that is part of the challenge of writing poetry, is being able to write in that sort of rhythm and convey your message in a short amount of words, but with a feeling behind them that sort of takes the reader on sort of that rhythmic journey.
Yeah, it's an intentional journey, right? You want to take them, just like you write a story, or if you're watching a Futurama, for example, they're taking you on a story and a journey of character development, or the actual, and then within the story there's little stories, right? And so you can kind of take pieces from all that, and then you want it to connect. And so I'm very intentional when writing pieces, make sure it flows, but also you don't want to lose the main message around it. And the message could be different how you interpret it, because poetry is different for everyone. But for me, that was always the goal.
So I'm interested in your introduction to poetry, because I learned poetry when I was at school. I went to a posh public school in England, and they would teach this stuff. So we learned there were 9 different types of poetry, and I guess yours would be like free verse. But I mean, there are, if you have like the sonnet, then they've got to be 14 lines, and they've got to have the Petrarchan sonnets with an A B B A B B A C D E style. And yeah, there's the limerick. What was it? The other ones, the ballad. There we go. The ballad's got to have 4 lines as a quatrain and have a rhyme scheme of A B A. So did you study any of those, and do you use any of those, or do you just go more with the rhythm of what sounds and feels good?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not technically skilled in the art of poetry, I would say. I didn't learn it from a technical standpoint. For me, my first experience was in, I don't know, grade 6 English class, and you had to do a poem for one of the assignments, and that was my intro to it. I remember my sister, she wrote a lot of poetry when we were younger, and so there was definitely some influence there. But for the way I write is very free flowing. Go with the flow, go with the thought you have in your mind, and just make it as fun as you can, so that the readers, listeners, watchers want more. That's really it. And so it comes down to feeling, and of course the message is of the utmost importance, because at the end of the day, I want my pieces to provoke thought, provoke feeling, give you some emotional connection, attachment with it, and hopefully you internalize it and relate it to your life. And that's really what the book is all about. The overlying theme really is relatability. At some point in your life, or the lives of those that you know, your friends or families and so forth, have gone through what I'm talking about in this book with certain pieces when it comes to family, friends, relationships, even just trying to find your way throughout the crazy world of life, right?
Absolutely. And to be honest, I mean, you said it just then. You said poetry is more about meaning than anything else. And I think poetry, emotion is probably the thing that inspires most people to write poetry, and probably inspires most people to enjoy reading poetry. And I think you kind of lose some of that if you're very particular about the style. I mean, it's all very good from a technical perspective, and you could, but I much more enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're taking the reader, right? Tell me where you're taking me from point A to point B. How can you, provoke thought? How can you take me on this roller coaster of emotion? And at the end of it, are you going to make me reflect on what I'm doing in life, or with my relationships, or with my friends, or work, or whatever's going on in your life? How I can really pull you in and demonstrate what I'm trying to showcase. So if it's a positive piece where I'm really saying like, hey, a lot of us go through some depression, but there's a way out. The best example of this, I remember I did a show in Toronto, and a listener, one of the patrons, came up to me and said, I caught it. I caught the virus. Whatever the poem was, it held on to him. And so he, at the end of it, he came up to me and says, that was great. I didn't realize others are going through what I'm going through, and this gives me some sense of hope and belief that it's all going to work out. And so that was really dope to hear, because I just never heard that before. And that's what poetry does. I think that's what any piece does, any kind of art does for those that love art. And I'm a very self-reflective person, and my pieces kind of reflect that, no pun intended. So I make sure that's what the readers and listeners and watchers gravitate towards.
I feel. Oh no, you go ahead, Craig. I've been kind of monopolizing this, so you go right ahead.
No. Mine are more technical questions, because I'm thinking about the idea of pulling together, like when you pull together a book of poetry. I imagine that there are, there might be more than two, but there's probably at least two ways of doing that. There's one would be a collection of just random poems that you've written over your life and your time, or you write a book with a specific theme that all the poems sort of revolve around.
So this poem specifically was written kind of to your point, the first part, which was just writing pieces throughout my experiences of life, but not only my own experiences of those that I've observed. So it could be yourselves, and if we were friends and I've observed things with you, I would write something that coincides with what you're going through. Not necessarily every piece is not personal to me, and that's what I've done for this book especially, but it's relatable, right? At the end of the day, every piece you're going to relate to, or you're going to know someone that has gone through it, so you're going to be able to relate in one way or another. And there's projects in the works right now that is more concept based, where let's say you have a love story, and there's poems that will go along the journey of a relationship, let's say, right? But for this particular book, it is just relatability, and I want to pick on a little bit of everything, which is motivation, love, experiences, family, self-reflection, friends. So I want to touch on a little bit of everything, because I want any and everyone to pick up the book and relate to one piece at least, and be able to share that with their network. And hopefully it's helped them in some way, shape, or form, and it's given them some sort of guidance, hope, vision, and just really put them on that correct path that we all need to be checked sometimes. And so maybe this helps.
I like that. What was the first poem you ever wrote? 6th grade, you said?
Yeah. I think it was called Fury, and it was centered around some. From vaguely remember, it was around like a volcano metaphor, and your emotions kind of being almost like a volcano, and if something to that effect, and it'll blow up at some point if you keep it locked in. Yeah, that was my first poem from what I remember. It was grade 6. I went to Nelson A. Boylan, Miss McDonald's class, and she introduced me to poetry from that standpoint for sure.
And you don't remember it?
No, off the top of my head. No, it was a long time. I have it somewhere. Actually, I have it somewhere at my parents' house for sure. I definitely have it still. I don't know. I don't keep it with me all the time. But it's a good relic.
Well, I asked because I remember the first poem, probably the only poem really, that I wrote, which was probably also grade 6-ish. I don't know. Whenever they start teaching poetry in school, and it was a limerick, and it went. There once was a grandfather clock which always went tick tock. He sat there all day with nothing to say, so he decided to sing some rock. that was my poem. It's always stuck in my head, and
good.
That's when I realized, yeah, I shouldn't be a poet.
I mean, we all got to start from somewhere. It started on your journey, so that's good.
Yeah, first and last. But I think that, like that kind of thing sticks with me. Like I wouldn't remember like a short story that I wrote at that time, but poetry, stays with you. And I think that's one of the amazing things about it is like you can write this thing that is emotional. I can watch movies, read emotional books, right? But that stuff sort of like the general emotion will be maybe stick with you for a while. But with a poem, it's a lot more likely that the whole thing or a good part of it sticks in your head. I mean, how many times do we hear people sort of quoting famous poems, right? A lot more than we hear them quote lines from books, because they really stick with you. And I think that's one of the most powerful parts of poetry.
Yeah, well, there's an emotional connection there, right? So it's similar to like your favorite song that you heard back when you were in grade 3 that you love, right? I mean, Magic School Bus theme song or like Wheels on the Bus. These are songs that you will
commercials.
Yeah, they're like jingles, right? They'll just be in your head and remember them. And I think that's for me the poems that I write, when it has a flow to it, it's also, and it's a good point that you brought up, that you can kind of remember it, and I remember that poem, and this kind of how it flowed, and this is the message that it was saying, and so yeah, that's kind of what I try to aim to do for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of your fears about when you first started about doing the poetry, because it's so personal, is sort of how it would be taken by the audience, whatever. And I imagine you have those people that come up and say they've caught the virus, but how, if you've ever gotten any criticism about your work, how do you take that, because it's so personal, and you've taken that leap to sort of perform it, and then you maybe hear something that's not as positive?
Yeah, it's happened for sure. And the first thought comes to mind, I remember when I would first hear bad criticism, initially I was very open to it. I was used as like constructive criticism. I can develop, I have this layer of thick skin, and I'm going to take what you've said and adopt it. Then I realized, not everyone is credible. I don't know, for lack of a better word, right? So you're a writer, and you write stories, but then you have Joe Schmo that goes to work, and he's an accountant, let's just say, but he's telling you how to write, but he's never written a thing in his life. So then you kind of take a step back, and you're like, okay, well, depending on the criticism, if you feel it's valid or valued, then you'll take it, sure. But there's times when it's just noise. And then I remember I've gotten criticism, I was just defensive. And then at times I would say, well, if you can do a better job, then write your own poem. No problem. I'm not going to stop you. So I think it depends on, one, the criticism, and then two, who it's coming from, right? That's like, if you were going to buy a house, you would probably get advice. You would probably look for advice from a realtor or someone that's bought a house, that has gone through the process, that knows how that process works, more than someone that just talks about it but has never gone through the process. So I am open to it, but they have to have value and credibility for me to internalize it and accept it. because sometimes people just want their voice to be heard, which is okay. But you know, if you're gonna speak about my poem that's very personal to me and it's talking about my family and you're shitting on it, excuse my French, you know, you're gonna get a little defensive. And it's like, where did that come from, right? So I think it depends from your question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a healthy attitude. That's what we sort of tell authors as well when they get bad reviews, right? It's like, you got to consider your source. You've got to,
Yeah.
you know, if you have tons of good reviews and then one person complaining about something, you know, it's not everyone's going to like the same stuff, right? So,
Right.
you know, some of the best books in the world still have 1-star reviews out there. And so,
Right.
you know, like you said, you have to have a thick skin and you have to be
Yeah.
able to let it sort of roll off. I was just wondering whether or not, you know, because it's so personal to you, if you had sort of a different sort of feeling, but it's good that you have that sort of same reaction, which is, I think, the healthy reaction is like, you know, especially with poetry, which is very personal and can be interpreted in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you write fantasy or, you know, a romance or whatever novel, I mean, there's not a lot of room for interpretation in most cases, right? But with a poem, you know, somebody might hear it and have a completely different response based on their own personal background and whatever. And so, yeah, you can't necessarily expect that everyone is going to hit everyone the same way. And
Yeah.
that's okay, right? I mean, you're creating emotion, whether it's good or bad. So
yeah, I've gotten questions. I've gotten questions about, you know, this poem, is this what you meant by it? And I would have to say, you know, what the purpose of my writing it versus you interpreting it is two different things. I don't want to, you know, conflate your mind about what my thought process was while I wrote it. What does it do to you? What's your interpretation, and how can you reflect and relate it to your life? And that's separate. But you know, to your point, I think Harry Potter and even The Lord of the Rings, they got rejected by how many major publishers before it's gotten, you know, it got finally published and picked up. So you kind of got to use that mindset and just, I've gotten rejected by dozens of employers and publishers, and you just kind of let it roll off your back, and you try not to take all the constructive or negative comments that come along with it, and you focus on your goal and what your purpose and why you're doing this. Why are you putting together poetry? Why are you promoting it to the world? Why do you want to share it? And you got to kind of keep that in the forefront of your mind. It's like those, you know, movie makers. Why are you making this movie? They're doing it, one, for them, but they also want to share this vision they have for making this movie, and hopefully people like it. And not everyone is, and not everyone has to, right? Poetry, and I've said it so many times, people have come to me, you know, I didn't like that poem. I didn't really know what you meant by this, and you know, it's probably not for me. And I said, great, no problem. Like, not everything is going to be for everyone, no problem. And those that it's going to help and they're going to appreciate it, then great, that's who I want to talk to. And those that don't like it, no problem. If you took a stab at it, you listened to it, watched it, read it, and it still wasn't for you, then, you know, I'm not going to force you to enjoy it. I'm going to hope you internalize it. And but my poetry is for those that are much more reflective, are all in this growth mindset, trying to develop themselves, trying to improve themselves, you know, that 1% improving yourself every day. And if one of my poems can help you get there, then that's a success story to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that sometimes people might connect with, you know, a bunch of your poems and then just have one or two that it doesn't connect with, right? So,
exactly. And that's okay.
Right. So if somebody was going to, somebody who's new to writing poetry, do you have sort of any advice that you would give to them for how to get started with it?
So the first thing I would say is write from your gut, write off your feeling. Don't worry about structure and rhyme and all that stuff in the beginning. In the beginning, treat it like a journal, kind of like self-therapy, you know, for those that have gone through it, and just write your feelings, your thoughts, your expressions. What are you trying to portray? Put it on a piece of paper or type it on the computer or on your phone. Get the message through, and then you can go back and kind of clean it up. And then really it depends on, is this poem or the poem you're going to write, is it for people or is it for you? Because there's two different ways of writing it, right? If it's for you, you can say, I feel this way, I think this way. But if it's for others and you're really trying to reflect and help them get to that place, then you want to write it in a different way, in terms of you think this way, or you should, or you have this mindset. And so it's the different way of creative writing, I think. But for me, initially, that's how I started, is just make it a personal thing about I. But then as I've grown and later, wanted to promote it and help others, I said, okay, well, it's not about me, it's about you and them and they. So I need to alter my poetry or even the words just to ensure that the reader and listener feels like it's relating to them. And it's not about Virus the poet. It's about, Roland. He's reading this poem, so he's gonna get affected by it more. And so that's how I changed it over time.
It is. I love I mean, when you talk about virus, I mean that it's an infectious thing, and I guess the idea is you say something that is meaningful and it infects people with that same meaningful. But it's a positive.
Exactly.
It's a positive thing.
That's exactly it. Exactly.
Do you have any sort of exercises or techniques that you do a lot to, or that people can do to sort of improve their poetic skills? Or I don't know if you just read a lot of poetry, or if there's just different things that you might do.
Yeah, I definitely read a lot. Like I go through Instagram or TikTok, and there's like a lot of great poets that have been kind of emerging through social media. So I definitely, scroll past some, and definitely some of my favorite, and I go back and listen to them, and some hit my chord, my string chord. So definitely, I would say read a lot. I think reading definitely helps. It opens your mind to different thoughts, ideas, approaches, patterns. But that's why I said, start off with your thoughts, your wants, your why, because you need to figure out what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what's the goal or the purpose. What are you trying to get to, right? And I think start there, and then you can slowly figure it out. And the good thing about any writing is that it's not stuck in stone, right? It's not set in stone. You can evolve and you can grow. So today I'm a non-rhyming poet. Tomorrow I may be a rhyming poet, and then maybe a week down or a couple months down the line I merge the two, and then maybe a couple years down the line I scrap that and I'm a whole different type of poet, right? So I think it depends, again, starting about what you're trying to achieve with poetry. For me, I started poetry as a way of therapy. Realistically, it's like a personal journal, and you're just writing about what you're seeing in the world and trying to make your way and navigate through life, through the ups and downs of it. And that was the best way for me to clear it up in my mind and come to terms or come to grips with certain things that I've gone through, or not even myself, things that I've seen friends and family go through, and me just having an emotional connection with them, feeling for them, and having that empathy piece, and having sympathy for them, and really wanting the best for everyone. So that's how I started, and that's what I would share with the audience, is to just write from your gut, write from the heart, just write it. Don't even worry about the structure and flow later. Just kind of let your mind bleed onto this paper, really, from a lack of a better word, but just let it flow, let it go, and just write. You ever hear there's like YouTube videos where they tell kids, don't think, just write, and they just, or they said, don't think, just draw, and they just end up drawing this picture. Just their mind takes them on it, like on autopilot. And so I would kind of say the same thing in the beginning.
Yeah, I love the idea that all these sort of new artists are emerging through social media. There's so many negative things with social media, and and a lot of them are warranted. I mean, here in Canada, I'm sure that there's been some news stories about all the school boards suing the social media companies, right?
Right.
For all the terrible things that they've done to our youth, and it's great to see that. But it maybe it does do some bad things, but there's also a lot of opportunities for people that it has opened up and created, right? So you have people that are poets that are getting sort of getting a following from being on social media, and maybe that has urge them towards a direction that they probably wouldn't have taken if they didn't have that outlet. You know, they might never have taken the leap to, or realized that people like their work enough to try to make it a career or to do something with it. And then they realize through social media that, hey, you know, people are really connecting with this. So I like that has become a way that new artists are getting found.
Yeah, I think the social media, to your point, is a good. It has its pros, it has its cons. Sometimes the cons, it's taken over a little too much, and it's you know, it's had this kind of hive mindset thinking approach. You know what I'm saying? But they're all, the positive side is, like you said, you can share your art and talent with the world. You can reach people that you have never even thought to reach, and countries and regions and different eyes and ears. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And like you said, there's a lot of people making money from social media that have been discovered, or just by simply putting their art online or on social media, and letting social media spread it for them. I think it's great. And I get a lot of inspiration from social media, just listening and watching, you know, other artists on there, not just poets, but also, you know, painters and, you know, people that make sculptures, and those that are car fanatics. So I think it's a great way. It's a great tool. I always say YouTube is probably the greatest thing that ever created, because you can learn any skill, you know, from a technical standpoint, then to a creative standpoint. You know, I learned how to do some drywalling in my house because of YouTube, right? So I think it's a great tool, but it's a tool. It's not to be overdone, you know. And I think that's the main issue with social media, is that people, I remember watching this video, I don't remember who said it, but he said you're too busy scrolling and watching what other people are achieving and doing, and that's why you're not doing anything. You're just sitting there scrolling constantly, endlessly, and you're watching.
That's so true.
You know, yeah, you get caught in this, and I always say that you get caught in this vortex. You know, you're going down this rabbit hole of YouTube videos or Instagram or TikToks, and you know, you're there after like 2 hours or an hour. You're like, oh shoot, I didn't even realize the time went by, when you could have used that 2 hours and done something maybe a little more productive with your time, or, you know, got the dishes done, or cleaned the house, or cut the grass. You know, there's just ways to do it. So I think setting maybe a timer is good for social media. And also, you know, following, what I've done personally is following the accounts that are actually trying to teach me something, versus, you know, and of course I follow the funny ones and the kind of mindless ones, which you need. You want that downtime, but also making sure you have a conscious effort and looking at the stuff that's going to engage with you, that's going to teach you something that you're interested in. Like I love space. I'm a big space guy, so I follow a lot of the accounts that talk about space, and, you know, the telescopes and the black holes and stuff like that. So it's also teaching me stuff. So I think that's important too when you talk about social media.
That is one of the cool things about, so like I love my kids because they're into the weirdest stuff because of social media, which is so cool. Like my 12-year-old has got into Napoleonic history, and so we watch Sharp's rifles together and movies like that. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm a history major, and I got like the most awesome 12-year-old is into that, and my other son is into like Russian history and space and stuff like that. And it's like the internet allows people to be into the weird shit that they want to be into, and that makes them really interesting. It's like I feel blessed to have my children because they're so interested in interesting things.
You got access, right? You might as well use it.
Yeah, I think, but what you were saying is true. Like you want to, there's a fine line between, you know, watching other people live their lives and living your own life, and you have to be able to sort of make that, cut that off. And I think that's sort of the biggest criticism is when you're a kid, it's harder to you know, find that line. When you're an adult and you have responsibilities, you can force yourself to stop a lot easier. But when you're, you know, a kid, it's like, oh yeah, the time goes by and it's like you don't have anything better to do. But by the end of the day, sure, you've watched all this cool stuff, but like you haven't really done anything. You haven't gone outside, you know. But you know, but listen, I mean, that's how you kind of figure out what you want to do, what you want to go try. And we didn't have that opportunity when we were young, so it's a different world out there.
I was actually having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and I said the same thing. I said, you know, what would we do if we grew up with social media? I grew up in the time yeah, with like BlackBerry side scroll and the flip phone and stuff like that, you know. But if I grew around the time of social media, I don't know what I would be doing. I think it would take a different direction. I also think I would have been impacted in a little more, maybe in a negative way, just because I've seen all these articles on the news. I'm sure you saw it, where like little kids are going into depression at a very early age because they see all these people on social media doing all these great things. But because, you know, Instagram, TikTok, it's a highlight reel. It's showing you the best of life. It's never going to show you the realities and the downfalls and the gaps and the voids and the setbacks, because no one wants to promote that or show that, right?
Well, there's the epic fail videos that my kids watch.
Right, yeah, but those usually are a little more comedy centric.
Yeah,
they're not super you know, deep or dark, I guess. And there is a dark side of trying to get through life and navigating through that. So I think if you're a kid, just to be mindful of that. You know, you're only seeing the best of it, but there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that could be going wrong that you're not seeing any of it. So it's also putting perspective in your mind. And so again, poetry is motion, mind, body, and soul. I'm talking about perspective, relatability, and where you're trying to go, and putting that in your mind and letting it just marinate there so you can reflect on what you're doing.
I love that. That sounds like a very good place to kind of wrap things up, because we're coming to the top of the hour. But what a piece of wisdom to wrap things up with.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Now, before we ask Virus about how everyone can find out about him and everything like that, Craig, do you have any final questions?
No final questions. But I mean, this has been really fun because, like I said, I'm not a poet, but I love hearing about things like this that I'm not knowledgeable about, because I love to learn, and especially anything to do with creativity and writing. It's, to me, really interesting. And hopefully for people that are listening that are interested in poetry and maybe haven't gotten started with it yet, I think you've given us a lot of really good insight on how to do that. So thanks for coming on and sharing this with us.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate your time, and the questions have been great. The conversation's been flowing, and that's great. And that's really what it's all about, having these conversations and learning each other, learning a bit from each other, and hopefully taking what you've learned and adopting it into your life in some way, shape, form, and you know, seeing where you can go with it.
Now, where can people find out more about you and more about your art?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, you can go to virusthepoet.com to look at a lot of my work. You can get socials, all socials at Virus the Poet on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and so forth. And of course, Poetry is Motion, Mind, Body, and Soul. You can purchase the book now on Amazon as well as your local bookstore. Just make a request. But if you don't want to buy it right away, I would implore you to go on the socials, go on virusthepoet.com, get a little taste for the poetry that you will get from me, or even on Spotify or iTunes, you know, Amazon Prime, wherever you get your music from. You can put Virus the Poet in and get a little taste of what I share from my art, and hopefully you will buy the book, share it, gift it even to someone that you love or cherish, and you will not be disappointed. So at Virus the Poet, virusthepoet.com, and I thank you guys for so much of your time.
Well, we will absolutely put a link down to virusthepoet.com in the description down below. And
Awesome.
For everybody listening and watching, why don't you scroll down there, check it out, and while you're down there, there's that comment section. So give Virus some love, leave a comment, let him know how much you appreciated everything that he shared with us today. And while you're down there, there's also a subscribe button. There's that like button, that little bell icon, so you can get notified every time we have a new episode of Fully Booked. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. So until then, thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.